What's up guys, it's GM Max here, and in this video we're going to see how to beat d4. I know d4 is a line a lot of people are very frustrated playing against, so this game here between Andrew Tang against Magnus Carlsen, Penguin GM, playing as white, well, we're going to see how Carlsen managed to win in just 17 moves by playing the move of c5. Now this Benoni approach is actually the best scoring defense against d4 at the 1600 to 1800 level, according to Lichess. And the idea is that after the move d5, we're going to play the Benko with b5. I mean, how often do you get to actually sacrifice a pawn in the opening and get a very powerful initiative without it being a blunder? Well, it turns out you can do so here. Now, some of you who are maybe not so experienced might be wondering, well, Max, what if white plays like this? Kind of just take the pawn and just, isn't this a gambit? Well, actually, it turns out with e6 that we're going to get our pawn back with a very good game here. Because if you try to defend that pawn with b4, you've got this move of a5. And it's very hard for white to defend this pawn sensibly, because if you play a3, then there's takes, and white's not going to have the ab4 recapture, because then the rook on a1 would be hanging along that a file. And if you play a move like bishop to e3 instead, well, black can even play a move like knight a6 and get the pawn back that way. Also a move like queen a5 and just doing the fork on the king and the pawn is also going to be sufficient here. So they can't really hang on to the pawn is the answer to the question. And if they do leave the pawn there, you can often just take it and play for d5, or a pretty good game in general. So after d5, black went for b5. And now white grabbed the pawn, saying, okay, if you're going to give me the pawn, I'm going to take it. And now after a6, Tang decided to follow a line I actually suggested in a course of mine beating the Benko for my inner circle members. And that is with a move e3, which is actually quite a sensible move if you think about it. White's just preparing to develop and also defending his extra pawn. I find that it's a move that you're not going to face as often as the accepted line with ba6, where white just grabs the pawn directly. And you might be wondering, well, Max, what is black's compensation for the pawn? Well, the answer is that after bishop a6, you get a more positional kind of compensation. This is not the kind of gambit where we go for a mad hack attack on the king, because that's not really going to work with the black pieces if white plays correctly. Instead, we're playing more for the positional compensation at, if they play e4 and try to develop normally, well, we can take and, leave their king without the right to castle. And then while they're spending that time castling their king by hand with g3, while we develop bishop g7, we're kind of playing like a dragon. For those of you who have some experience, you might recognize that dragon formation, with the dragon pawn structure, where, this guy on c5 is like the tail and the g6 is like the head, as such. Well, anyway, after knight f3, the way that we can make a Chinese New Year for us is to play the move knight bd7, where we see that, again, black's developing very sensibly, and if white were to play a move like h3, then we can put the queen on a5 or on b6. Our rook is going to come to b8, and we can see already the power of black's active pieces. Yeah, it's true that we don't have an immediate threat in the position, but all of our pieces are on very good squares. It's not that easy for white to develop his bishop from c1, because the rook on b8 is, after all, pressuring that pawn on b2. And while also our knights can come to very good squares. For example, a move you'll often see is a move knight g4, e5, and trying to get into that d3 square, which is why white prevented it with h3. So if they do stop knight g4, a good plan B, if we just make a move like, let's say, queen to c2, is to play something like knight e8, and we can bring the knight around that way. Because I find it in the Benko, once you get rid of that knight on c3, your bishop now is just completely unobstructed. You've got heavy pressure on b2. And that's the reason why these positions, even though the computer does claim that white is just much better at this point by playing the move of a4, I find it actually in over-the-board play that if we're talking about games at a club level like 2000 below, it's actually black that has a plus score from these positions. So that tells you already that this is quite a dangerous system on a practical level, that over the board it's not that easy for a club player to hang on to the extra pawn, because there are a lot of tricks that black has in these positions, and that means it can be even more effective in faster time controls also, even at a higher level. If you do want to avoid this line with white playing a4, there is another tricky move on it you can explore for the more advanced players, and that's to play the line known as the Perunovic variation with g6, where we delay this move if bishop takes a6 in favor of going for an attack on the center. So after castles, if they were to play a move like knight to f3, well, we could go queen a5 and kind of get pressure with this idea of knight takes e4, trying to use the pin, and there'll also be some lines where you might see black go for e6 and try to challenge the center as an alternative to the bishop a6, d6 idea that we kind of saw beforehand. That's definitely something you can explore in your own time that I think does probably give black better chance of equalizing. Though it is true that white can improve on knight f3, and moves like a7 are a little bit annoying. But those are subtleties that sort of fall outside the scope of this particular video. And finally, if you really love the way that Carlsen played it, you can't even consider the move e6, which is actually the computer's recommendation and not anywhere near as bad as I'd initially assumed in the past. Because after e3, actually this is the move that Carlsen played. He played the move of e6 at this point, going after the pawn, deciding not to go for the usual g6, bishop, g7 castles. That tends to be a pretty good setup, by the way, if they don't take on b5 or if they give back the pawn early. But if they don't do that, then sort of e6 can be a pretty decent idea, at least on a practical level. The main line here is to take on b5 and go queen a5, but I kind of like white's chances there as well. So e6 is a good choice, and well, probably what white should have done is play d6. I mean, black could definitely play for some tricks, like you can go d5 and go bishop d6 castles, and try to push in the center. Though I do have to be honest and say this line is sort of more something that will probably work better in blitz chess, because objectively white is up a pawn if he plays correctly, as I cover in my Beating the Benko course. You can find a link in the description if you want to learn more about how to beat this best opening against d4 at the club level, like 1800 and below. In any case, after knight to c3, black played the move e takes d5. We had knight d5. Now after bishop b7, we see that the bishop has a very nice open diagonal, which also forced white to be somewhat precise to neutralize the initiative. Probably the best move for white here is to go knight takes to f6, and then to play knight to f3. Just sort of trying to block that bishop and trying to get castled here. But even then, I think the black still gets quite a bit of compensation after bishop to e7, for example. I mean, you're just going to play castles, take on b5, and then put the pawn on d5 with quite a nice center, and you're still going to get your active play with the rooks down to a and b files. I mean, objectively, white is still somewhat better, but at least you get your usual compensation, and practically it's still not so easy for white to consolidate. But instead, Tang played knight c3, and now I think the black's position gets quite a lot better. I mean, even an idea like going d5 can be interesting, but Carlsen decided on bishop e7 first, and then after knight f3 castles and bishop e2, well, now Carlsen played a takes b5. And it's just a case where we sort of see that now it's quite good to wait for white to play bishop e2 and only then take the pawn, because it means if white plays bishop takes b5, well, it kind of took him 2 moves to take back rather than 1, so it's a little bit of a tempo battle there with keeping the tension. And I actually think in that case, after d5, the black does get very decent compensation now. After castles, Carlsen played the move of knight b to d7, trying to keep that long diagonal open for the bishop. But I actually think that a better move would have been to play the move queen to a5, or even maybe queen to a7, c7. There are a lot of decent moves, like probably I'd actually go for knight c6 on further thought. Maybe go bishop d6, knight e5, and try to put the pieces to attack the king. It's probably the best approach to prove some compensation. But anyway, after knight b7, and do keep in mind this was a bullet game, so that's why the players me didn't play the very best moves. Though of course it's true that Tang and Carlsen are 2 of the very best bullet players in the world. Well, the game saw white play a4, just securing that post on b5 for the bishop. Quite a reasonable approach, though I do think that after bishop d6, that maybe white could have considered going for b3 and bishop b2, which also could have been done in the previous move, because once you get the bishop on that long diagonal, you definitely have a lot of active play in that case, like your pieces will be all well placed there. Instead, white played h3, which ends up being a little bit of a concession, as we're going to see, where after queen to e7, well, white played the move b3, which may not be the best timing for the move. You know, it looks very weird, but actually sometimes the passed pawn can even be very strong in the middle game as well. I think getting that passed pawn a6 would have asked some difficult questions of black here. But of course, to play this does require a lot of guts as white. Well, instead after b3, what do you think is the move that Carlsen played here with black to play? So while you're trying to figure out what Carlsen's trick is, well, do make sure to leave a like to show support for the video, and also to subscribe to stay updated with more of my Grandmaster Chess videos. Okay, also you can comment below if you want to see if you guessed the move right. Always fun to compare all your thoughts as well with the video. So well done if you came up with the move knight to e5. And this move actually shows a subtle disadvantage of playing the move h3, because if black does get this battery, well, then that pawn a3 could be a little bit of a weakness. It's not that big of a point, but it could be a little bit annoying, potentially. And here is where, unfortunately, Tang made his blunder. I think that in this position, the best move is actually to play knight to h4 here. Basically, just sort of the ideas of knight f5. And, well, if you can get rid of this bishop, obviously that battery on the king is not going to happen after that. And a move like g6, while it's a good move, does at least weaken the black king slightly. So it's not as though black is getting away with this completely free. It's worth pointing out, by the way, that bishop b2 would actually be a mistake here as well, because after knight takes f6, queen f6, queen f3 rather, well then there's the move d4, where you're hitting the queen, but you're also hitting the knight at the same time, so that would win a piece for black. So Tang at least didn't fall for this, but he did fall for another trick, where he played a move bishop e2, thinking he could just keep the tension. Unfortunately, there's a move knight f3, and okay, let's make sure you guys are paying attention. What would be the move that you would play here with black to play? Okay, well done if you recognize loose pieces drop off. You'd be surprised at how much your blitz range could increase and bullet range can increase just by recognizing when the opponent's pieces are undefended and having that sharp tactical vision. So well done if you camp with the move queen e5. Threatening the mate on h2 as well as threatening the knight on c3. White is unable to defend against both of these at once, so rather than playing g3 and just letting the knight be taken for free, instead Tang resigned at this point. So there you are, now you see how to beat d4, where the key is to use the Benko Gambit, where we can play d4, knight f6. By the way, the move c5 also works quite well if they did play some knight f3 or some London, still c5 is a good move. But the game saw c4, c5, and now we know the idea of playing the Benko Gambit with b5 and being takes with a6. And basically just going for this up with either the kingside fianchetto and putting the rooks on the a and b files in the middle game, or going for e6 and using the fact that their pawn is not on c4 to get that early advantage in the center. In any case, good luck with playing this in your own games. As always, do make sure to keep up to date with this channel by subscribing. That way you'll get more of my Grandmaster Chess content. And I will see you guys in the next training video where we're going to see how to beat that next chess opening.